Thank you, Bill.
So thank you very much, and I'm really happy to be here. I'm glad that we were able to set this up after the talk at the Atlantic Council. I think Barbara and I were on that panel. So my respects to my colleagues from the Foreign Ministry and to Barbara from the State Department for being here. And thank you again to the President and members of the club for inviting me to be here for this discussion tonight. So right now in Nassau, there's a massive conference with some 3,200 delegates from across the Caribbean and Africa. And they're there for the annual meeting of the Afrexim Bank and consecutively a discussion on Caribbean-African trade. This is part of the now familiar mantra of South-South cooperation. The Afrexim Bank has been engaged in the Caribbean, following up on the decision of the African Union to declare the diaspora the sixth region of the African Union. The Caribbean is one of the areas of the largest concentrations of people of African descent in the world outside of Africa. I started there because one of the statements I've made in my own country is that as I've traveled around the Bahamas and the Caricom region, there's nothing that I've seen that cannot be solved by money. Our countries, both in Africa and the Caribbean, have been underdeveloped by the lack of resources. The Afrexim Bank has seen the Caribbean now as an area of growth potential and is planning to put what for us is a significant set of investments in the region to help with our development. Most of our countries, with the exception of Haiti, are classified as either middle income or high income countries. And because of that and the classification of our GDP per capita, we are unable to get the concessionary financing from traditional sources at reasonable rates. So just a little digression about Caricom. Remember, Caricom is basically the English-speaking countries in the Caribbean that were former British colonies. And following independence in the 1960s, they formed an organization called Caricom to work toward a single market and economy, but more importantly for us, on the issue of functional cooperation across the foreign policy platform. So many countries come to Caricom when it's time for vote counting at the United Nations or OAS or any of the other multinational organizations, because you've got 14 votes in that body. And we tend to act in concert. Secondly, the GDP per capita issue. Now, I'm not the author of this, and honestly, I cannot remember where I first heard it, but to describe the problem we're complaining about, I call it the Robinson Crusoe problem. And it's the problem of Robinson Crusoe and Friday on an island. And Robinson Crusoe is worth $1 billion, and Friday is worth $1. But the GDP per capita of that island is 500 million and 50 cents, except that Robinson Crusoe has all the money and his man Friday has none. And those are the distortions we're talking about in our islands. In the Bahamas, our Prime Minister has said that 40% of our national debt is due to extreme weather and climate change. Yet, we have had to bear the costs of what is now admitted to be a problem not of our own making by going to the international financial private capital markets in order to recover, with the attendant expense of that capital. We struggle throughout the Caricom region to recover after these extreme weather events. The last one for us was Dorian in 2019, and something like $3 billion in losses. And if you go to Abaco and Grand Bahama today, people are still struggling to get back to where they were pre-Dorian in 2019. So in our societies, there's a deficit in the access to capital. And we are shopping around the world for sources of capital. And this has meant outreach away from the Americas to Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and the Development Bank of Latin America. Notwithstanding the promises in the developed world that there would be change in the international financial institutions about this, the words have not yet quite translated into deeds. Now, in 2013, the now President Joseph Biden was then Vice President of the United States. And he was dispatched to a working meeting with the Caricom heads in Port of Spain and Trinidad. There are two takeaways that I recall from that meeting. First, Caricom prime ministers were complaining about the fact that our countries could not access capital from the United States for development projects. And his reply was that the United States didn't have any money to give, and if the Chinese had it, then God bless them, he said, take it. The Chinese had promised a $20 billion set aside for investments in the region. And I'll pause here by saying the basis for this, China, is simply to vote at the United Nations for one China. That's it. There's no quid pro quo, but simply support the one China policy. And if you read their manual on the relations with Latin America and the Caribbean, that really is all. For Latin America, it hinges on raw materials. For the Caribbean, it's the votes on one China. And I'll come back to why I said that later. The second takeaway I had was that prime ministers complained that there was a raid on Caricom talent, with the region losing nurses, doctors, and other professionals to the United States. Mr. Biden said, with characteristic frankness, that he wouldn't apologize for that either. He said America wanted the best, and as long as the region could produce them, the United States would take them. In 2024, I was tasked as foreign minister with seeking the support of the United States for a $300 million loan for building the new hospital which we require in Nassau. The Prime Minister's view was that the first option was to seek American capital. The Chinese were making a serious offer of capital to which they have since agreed, and his view is that we should have sought first from the US, and only if there were a default, we should look elsewhere. There was not a solution from our traditional partners. We need the hospital, and we were obliged to accept the Chinese capital to build it, and we thank the Chinese for it. We were concerned about some of the commentary in the United States that we were the subject of Chinese economic hegemony or even political hegemony, and that this might constitute a threat to the United States. In our view, accepting Chinese money on business and commercial terms does not constitute any of those things, but rather a fact of life if your population is to survive. In a few weeks, as you've heard, we will welcome a new deputy head of mission to the United States Embassy in Nassau. There's a brand new $350 million building in Nassau which awaits formal commissioning as the Embassy of the United States of America on the 28th of June, 2024. There's not been a U.S. ambassador to occupy the old embassy or the new embassy since 2011, and the prospect of an ambassador seems as remote as ever. Yet, on a practical level, things work fine, and one supposes that the status quo is certainly sustainable, tenable, even though the nuances of a political appointee's access would add some weight to some irritants in the relationship. In my discussions, and I thank Barbara and those for arranging this with the new head of mission, the one irritant that I mentioned was the policy on the issue of visas. There are too many complaints from citizens of the Bahamas whose visa requests are rejected on what seems an arbitrary or whimsical basis. To be frank, I most recently warned Bahamians in the House of Assembly about traveling to the United States and overstaying their time. I've indicated also that the decisions on visas are, in your law, a subjective decision. I've also indicated that the Foreign Ministry of the Bahamas has no say or influence on whether someone gets a visa or not. Nonetheless, it is incumbent upon me to make the point that in a society as small as ours, and as close as ours is to yours, that the decision-making on this issue ought to be examined in light of the complaints. To be fair, the officials have, in fact, agreed to review the complaints. We have a pre-clearance facility. And for those of you who don't know what that is, this allows you to clear U.S. Customs and Immigration on Bahamian soil. There are about 10 of these around the world, some as far away as Abu Dhabi, one in Shannon, there's one in Punta Cana, one in Aruba, I think, in the Caribbean, and some others. So this allows Bahamians, the pre-clearance facility allows Bahamians to enter the United States on a police record. So you go to the police, they produce a record which says you have no criminal offenses on your record, and this allows you to enter the U.S. The Bahamas doesn't qualify for the ESTA program, nor does any Caricom country qualify for that program. And we've asked why, because when you examine the list, there's no country of African ethnic majority in which that program obtains. The answer is that we do not fit the criteria. The program requires, we are told, a particular rejection rate for applications prior to granting the status. And our rejection rate was too high, or was at the time we last asked. So we've simply let the status quo continue. We're now beginning discussions on global entry, and I'm advised that is now only available to citizens of the Dominican Republic and the Caribbean. So we are working on those discussions. I made the point to our citizens that the United States is a country to which you can emigrate legally fairly easily. Sometimes takes a while, but it is doable, and we seek to persuade people not to take to rafts and rickety boats to make their way to Florida from Haiti, Cuba, through the Bahamas. It continues, however, and in this connection, we've been preaching the gospel of détente with Cuba as a solution to the problem of refugees who seek to leave their homeland in Cuba and set off to America. The policy of the United States should change toward Cuba, and if it does, in our view, that will alleviate the suffering in Cuba dramatically and lessen the issue of outward irregular migration. And the situation in Cuba is so serious today that the other day Barbados had to send milk to Cuba because people had no milk. So here's the list of people of Caricom descent in the United States, and this record dates back to 2017. The ambassador was showing me some stats which are beyond that, but I'll just stick with 2017 for the moment. So Jamaica has 745,000 people in the United States, which is about 26% of its present population. Haiti has 680,000 people of Haitian ancestry, or 5% of their current population. Trinidad and Tobago has 235,000, or 17% of their current population in the States. Barbados has 65,000, or 23% of its current population in the States. Grenada has 34,000, or 27% of its current population. Dominica, 34,000, or 46% of their current population. The Bahamas has 33,000, or 8% of its current population. St. Vincent and the Grenadines, 24,000, or 23% of its current population. So for our countries, those are significant aggregations of people outside the country. We had an interesting discussion prior to lunch about what this means, because there's always this talk about the brain drain out of the Caribbean. I happen to argue it another way, and the ambassador was saying he joins me in this, in that my view is you get an education, and that education is for you. And it's meant to take you anywhere around the world that you can trade your skills and your profession. So I'm not concerned so much about that. And what you see is, by the success of people who live in the United States, that the systems under which they're trained and countries from which they've come make significant contributions to the United States. I think the situation, though, is growing more, and our leaders are more alarmed, particularly as this raid on nurses and doctors and teachers continues. I won't even add here Anglican priests as well, by the way. I don't know why that is. But I think we've lost about 10 or so Anglican priests in the last couple of years who've all been attracted to congregations in the U.S. Anglican is Episcopal, the British Church of England. So what strikes me, and I admit this is anecdotal, is that many of the people who are working in the United States from our countries in the Caricom region are the recipients or were the recipients of public education in our countries. That public education is financed or will be financed by the taxpayers of our Caricom countries. And yet, the beneficiaries of the education are not our taxpayers, but the taxpayers of the United States. And we've been arguing for some time that there ought to be some form of support in exchange for the talent which is being supplied. So when we've raised the issue in the past, the answer we've been told is education is not a federal issue in the United States. It's a state-by-state issue. So the federal government can't supply an answer. We also, though, have to admit that many of our citizens get the benefit of track scholarships and sports scholarships to the United States and go on either to live here or to make contributions to the international community. Little known fact maybe is we have a basketball team which will go to the Olympics this year, and made up, I think, exclusively of NBA players who are Bahamian. And one of them we're trying to get is Klay Thompson. All right. Now, the problem is he has to be released by the U.S., I think it's the U.S. Olympic Committee or the NBA. And they're saying, give us $250,000, we release him. But so that's where it stands now. But he's a dual national, so he's Bahamian as well. Now, Doug was saying that he lives in Life at Key. And I was teasing him at the start. There's a man named Henry Cabot Lodge, who is the president of the Life at Key Club, or was. When I was in school in Boston, they had this little slogan I was telling him. And it said, Boston is a city where the Cabots speak only to the lodges and the lodges speak only to God. And his name happens to be Henry Cabot Lodge, so that must be quite an interesting dialogue. But I think his father was an ambassador for the United States, South Vietnam, when that country existed. But as a result of that enclave, I got to know a little bit Henry Kissinger before he passed away. He was an annual visitor to Life at Key. In February, he came, spent 4 weeks or so there with his wife. And one night, I had the honor of sitting with Paul Volcker, the former central banker, on one side, and Dr. Kissinger on the other side. And I tell that story because that picture says more than words can actually say about the Bahamas and its relationship to the United States. So in talking to him, he agreed that the influence of the Bahamas that it might have on U.S. policy might be outsized precisely because of that little enclave in Nassau and the personalities that have lived and continue to live there. I was saying to him, Nick Brady, who was Bush's Secretary of Treasury, his family's had a home there since the 1920s, and he still lives there today. And the second thing we agreed on was the northeastern establishment of the United States could be found there on holiday every winter. So one of the things John Kerry told me, I think there's an island, a resort island called Harbor Island, which Taylor Swift just visited 2 weeks ago. God only knows what they see there in Harbor Island, but it's a very popular place. It's got pink sand on its northern fringe, and I think the owner of J. Crew has a house there. John Kerry stays at the house when he's there. And he was saying, when he was Secretary of State, that one of the joys he found about the benefits of it was that you could be in Washington and 2 hours later be in a completely different world. It was close by, but a completely different world. So that's the framework within which we interrelate. He agreed that the Northeast establishment had the Bahamas as a preferred second home destination, which also helped to influence the policies of the United States toward the country. For example, I think Senator Tom, is it Harkin? Harkin, yeah, had a house in Abaco. So when the storm hit, resources were able to be mobilized because of the fact of that living in Elbow Key. I don't want to make too much of it, but I do think certainly that given the fact that so many of our people get their education in the United States, who come from the Bahamas and across the sub-region, that certainly has caused and influenced public life in the Bahamas. So if you take my own education, for example, I get trained by Benedictine monks who set up a monastery which is in the middle of Minnesota, which is in the northern end of Minnesota. And then my English teacher tells me I should, and I was just thinking in retrospect how these teachers just tell you what to do and you don't think about it, you just go and do it. So I end up going to Antioch College, which has got to be in the 70s the most liberal of liberals in this establishment. I had to tell them that no, I could not join the demonstrations at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base because I'm not a citizen of this country, and that's not my fight. But yeah, so I go to Antioch College, where Horace Mann founded a place, and Coretta Scott King and Rod Serling were the two famous graduates. And Horace Mann is famous for saying, "Be ashamed to die without doing something for humanity." So that's the kind of milieu I was trained in at the BA level, and then later I get to go to the Kennedy School, where I did my master's in public administration, and then ended up being chair of the Alumni Association, and got to know Joe Nye and Larry Summers. So those are good experiences. But the point of it is that there's a lot of that in the Bahamas, of people tracking through that path, and that's directly influenced the way policies and government and people and their attitudes work in the Bahamas. It's because of that, because of those experiences. I therefore agree with that sentiment, this sentiment. I think it's a good thing, the training, because obviously it served the country well, and certainly on a personal level it's enhanced my own sense of well-being and my own life materially. So the former governor or late governor general of the Bahamas, Arthur Hanna, was welcoming the South Korean ambassador to the Bahamas, and he said to the South Korean ambassador in his remarks that the Bahamas and South Korea had something in common, and it was this. He said, "We are both nestled next to giants, and only as independent as the giants allow." I agree there, and I also say, though, that the connections of kith and kin between the two societies is a benefit to both the United States and ourselves, and I think this situation obtains throughout the Caricom region. And you just have to think of the personalities. The Attorney General, Eric Holder, who's a descendant of Barbados, Sidney Poitier, who's a descendant from the Bahamas, Colin Powell, a descendant from Jamaica. Those are just a few examples. It is in that light, then, that Caricom has been engaged in a close working relationship with the development of U.S. policy on Haiti. And I think the present U.S. administration has done a good job thus far in seeking to right the ship there and allowing Caricom to take the lead. In this connection, I want to thank the President of the United States and the point person, Vice President Harris, and Assistant Secretary of State Brian Nichols, for their work. Barbara is also representing the department and done a good job. And secondly, Caricom recently announced its support of the proposals to settle the war in Gaza advanced by the President of the United States. It is our hope that the way forward on this issue is now clear. And I mention Haiti in particular because this is my second time at the wheel with this Haiti issue, the first being when Aristide was ousted from power. And at that time, remember, the solution was US troops on the ground, followed by Brazilian troops on the ground. And we had Roger Noriega had Brian's job at the time. And we had all these discussions with the Haitian elites. And I can tell you, dealing with Haitian political elites is like no other experience that you can come by. No other experience. And it takes a lot of patient, brave endurance to move your way through that. And a couple of things is, all of us, Haiti has 11 million people, so they outnumber all the rest of us. They struck the first blow of freedom as the first black republic in the region, so their view is you can't tell them anything because they're the outliers. So essentially you have to help to shepherd the process because it has to be a Haitian solution. The political solution has to be Haitian-led, and anything else is going to founder. So that took a lot of patience, and this time the United States took the decision to step back instead of being directly involved and to allow Caricom. We had 3 former prime ministers, Perry Christie from the Bahamas, Bruce Golding from Jamaica, and Kenny Anthony from St. Lucia, who led the effort of talking and cajoling and seeking to persuade to get to a settlement. I think we've got a settlement, and it looks as if it's trending in the right direction. So that's pretty good that we are where we are. So we look forward to progress in Haiti, and that's going to benefit the entire region. And I just want to say that it would appear, since I was talking about Caricom being largely English-speaking, with the exception of Suriname, which is Dutch, and a former Dutch colony, and Haiti, which is a former French colony. And P.J. Patterson was the Prime Minister of Jamaica. He chaired Caricom at the time, and he came up with the idea that Haiti should be incorporated into Caricom. And he said that, the Spanish-speaking countries had sort of natural affiliations with the Iberian group, either with SICA or with the larger Latin American group, and of course the language. And Haiti was simply out there by itself with no allies. They're simply swimming in the deep. So he thought that it was a good idea for them to be incorporated into CARICOM, and we should become their natural allies and sort of advance guard. And I think that's worked out well, because even though when there was a coup which displaced Aristide, and one of the prime ministers came, and CARICOM was seeking to make some intervention, and he told the Miami Herald, those little countries, they're nothing. But I think that aside, that was probably just a bit of pique, because at the end of the day, when he examined his role as prime minister in the context of Haiti and the hemisphere and the sub-region, he realized that the world would not speak to Haiti by itself, that you had to actually be incorporated into a larger body for the world to pay attention. And that is an argument we have in our own country. We have to say to Bahamians, this is why we have the foreign policy we have, because we simply can't be swimming in the deep by ourselves. In sum then, I hope I've painted a picture of a region that is joined at the hip to the United States in trade and in economics, and shared values of human rights, tolerance, and decency, and the rule of law. We hope that this influences your country's policies on climate change, on immigration to the United States, the latter of which has proven to be of great value to both societies. We also hope that the world order, the Second World War post-world order, with some tweaks, continues to be the rational basis on which American policies continue, and that domestic exigencies do not adversely affect the rationality of those international policies. We're watching, all of us, with a wary eye, W-A-R-Y, eye, the November general elections in America. We are pledged to work together on building a better world, regardless of who wins. This is particularly the case in the policy as it relates toward climate change. And I thank you very much for your attention.
The Foreign Minister has time for a few questions if anyone would like to take this opportunity to ask him something. Anything come to mind?
Could you go back to your remarks about the conference that was held in Trinidad in 2013? And I also want to say I appreciate your coming here and speaking for us. It's very informative and I very much appreciate it. I had a problem hearing some of it, and so if you could just repeat your remarks, the first remarks you were making about the issues with capital, and I think you mentioned the Vice President Biden's advice to you, but I just missed that segment. If you could just elaborate, repeat that.
Sure. So there was a meeting convened in Trinidad with all the heads of government of the Caricom region. All the prime ministers were there. He was the vice president at the time. And he said to them, the first thing they said was that China had set aside $20 billion in investment capital for the Caricom region, $20 billion. And the prime ministers were asking, well, we'd really prefer U.S. capital, easier, And he said, look, the U.S. doesn't have, just like this, he said, the U.S. doesn't have any money to give you. If the Chinese are giving you money, take it, God bless you. That's what he said, right? And then the second thing I said was that they complained about the raid on Caricom talent. And he again said, I'm not apologizing for that. The United States wants the best, so as many as you can produce, we're going to take them.
Thank you.
Right. Yes.
Well, good evening, Mr. Minister. Thank you so much for your time. I greatly enjoyed your talk, particularly your point about Haiti, contrasting the current response with the response during RST. So thank you so much for that. You mentioned in talking about China, and that China had said to the Caricom countries that all we want is your vote on the One China policy, and in Latin America, all we want are your resources. And you said, I'll come back to that in a moment, why I mentioned that. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if you came back to that, so I would love if you could to come back to that.
Yes, I didn't perhaps address it directly. What I meant to say is that what happens then is, if you look at the fact that you can't get access, I talked about the hospital and the lack of access to the capital. And so you're forced to take capital from other places. And then you have the arguments coming out of certain sectors in the US that the Chinese are about to take over the Bahamas. And I'm saying that there's no evidence from our point of view. We've negotiated loans on a purely commercial basis. We pay the money back. There's no hegemonic threat as far as I can see. No security threat to the United States as a result of that. These are purely commercial loans. And they really, when they have a book which describes what their foreign policy is. I've simplified it in my usual way. But essentially it boils down to they want access to the resources of South America or Latin America. And in the Caribbean region, they want the support on One China. And that's So there's not really any military or any of those other things, it seems to me, that they're interested in. It's simply support on this one China policy. And as you see, they're getting more and more agitated about this as time goes on this one China issue. So when the World Health Organization met, I think it met last week, health minister was over there. Before the meeting took place, we had a call by the Charge of China to say, do not under any circumstances allow Taiwan to be represented at the World Health Organization. So you have that. That's their main interest, I think. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Right. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Minister. You were mentioning the Spanish-speaking islands of the region. I'm from Mexico. So I was wondering, what's your relationship, including with Cuba, knowing that it's a very difficult situation with what's happening in humanitarian crisis. But what would be the relationship as Caricom with regards to the Spanish-speaking islands of the region?
So Cuba, all of us have, in December 1974, the first four countries that became independent from the British in the Caribbean signed and agreed to diplomatic relations with Cuba at a time of great hostility toward making that move. And so there's been a close relationship culturally, economically with Cuba from that day. And we had, in 1980, there was an incident which took place on the 10th of May 1980, where Cuban MiGs sunk a vessel of the Bahamas. Defense Force is about 6 weeks old. And so a lot of bad identification, and they didn't know. And so anyway, they apologized for the event, paid compensation. Since that time, we've exchanged ambassadors. The countries are close. I mean, it's an hour and 20 minutes away from Nassau by plane. Their commercial flights 3 times a week. Same thing with the Dominican Republic. Good working relationship. Cuba's not applied to join CARICOM. The Dominican Republic has. And we're simply awaiting a decision of the heads as to when that is going to take place. Some rough weather occurred when the courts in the Dominican Republic stripped people of Haitian descent of their citizenship, and that caused a huge ruckus within CARICOM, so the whole process was paused. And it hasn't quite recovered since then, but the application is still active. Yeah. But otherwise, we're quite close. Yeah.
So, may I?
Yeah, sure.
I'm Joy, and I'm actually of Jamaican descent, born
Right.
and raised. And you mentioned the noise around the Chinese kind of swooping in, and from your perspective, it's a no, right? I know in Jamaica, it's the same conversation where the Chinese seem to be building out the infrastructure, for example, freeways between Montego Bay and Kingston, toll roads, and those toll dollars are going back to China. And so I guess my question for you would be beyond, is there any validity to the concern that maybe your nationals aren't benefiting as greatly from some of these deals that are being brokered? Are the Chinese hiring local Bahamians to work and build these hotels and other buildings, or do you see any validity to some of the concerns that folks are raising?
That is a potent argument, the question of the labor. And we were able to negotiate, even in this hospital deal, a split, which is, I think, 30-70 or 60-40, something. But one of the things is, despite our ambitions to do it ourselves, there's a shortage of labor in any event. And so all of the projects, if you look at all of the big projects in the Bahamas, hotel projects, they've all had to bring in foreign labor. So it's whether it's a question of Chinese labor or other labor. For example, when Carnival did the big Crystal Palace, they had to bring in Mexican workers. Same thing with Atlantis. They had to bring in workers from Mexico in order to complete the project on time. So we were, in one of the road projects, we were able to negotiate for Bahamian labor to do that entirely. So the Chinese are not fixed on this, although as with the export-import banks of all of the countries, they always want some kind of return for their own nationals. So, for example, if you get a loan from, it's not called OPIC anymore, I forgot.
GFC.
Right, if you get a loan from them, they're going to want to make sure that the materials you buy come from the United States. I mean, you're not going to be buying Chinese material, so things of that nature. So we don't consider that to be onerous. And the issue is the infrastructure has to be built. It has to be built. I mean, Jamaica, I remember when you used to have to, take 5-6 hours to get to Ocho Rios, and now you're just on this big highway and you just get on it and you're there in a short time. So it's really improved getting from north to south. Some of the things have been done, and I think it's served the greater interest of the people of the country, I think. But 9 million people come to the Bahamas every year, and 90% of them come from the United States. So, and they seem to have a good time. Yes, right. Yeah, I was passing through customs in New York once. That's coming after some long journey, and he looked at the passport and he said, "You got your face all made up. You're from paradise. What's the matter?" I said, "Yeah, okay. You could sleep on 15 hours on an aircraft." Yes. Well, that's it. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Foreign Minister, for sharing your perspective with